confident, determined, funny, a ray of light. Those are just a few words Chicago police officer Aréanah Preston's mother used to describe her at the funeral today.
It was just after midnight in Chicago's Avalon Park neighborhood, a quiet stretch of South Side streets where most residents were already asleep. But for 24-year-old Aréanah Makayla Preston, the night was far from over. She had just finished a long shift serving her city as a police officer. Her heart and mind were likely set on simple things: rest, maybe breakfast in the morning, and preparing for the busy weekend ahead. What she couldn't have known was that danger was waiting for her just outside her own home. That night, a car rolled slowly through the neighborhood, its occupants scanning the streets with hungry eyes. For teenagers masked and armed had spent the evening preying on strangers, robbing and stealing, leaving fear in their wake. And as fate would have it, they would cross paths with Officer Preston in those fragile moments between duty and safety. Aréanah was no ordinary young woman. She was a daughter, a twin, a friend, an officer who stood out for her kindness and dedication. Just days away from graduating with her master's degree in jurisprudence, she was already dreaming of the next chapter. Maybe the FBI, maybe a future in law. Her life was on the brink of something extraordinary, but the cruelty of violence would cut it all short. The encounter happened in seconds. A stolen Kia screeched to a halt. Masked figures jumped out, and gunfire shattered the silence of the early morning. Neighbors awoke to the sound of chaos. Aréanah fought back, drawing her weapon in defense, but she was outnumbered. Shots echoed down the block, and within moments, the vibrant life of a young officer who had dedicated herself to protecting others was stolen. This wasn't a random act. It was part of a reckless crime spree that had already left multiple victims behind that night. But in targeting Aréanah, the consequences of their actions reached far beyond the immediate. They had struck down not only a young woman, but a symbol of hope for her family, her community, and the city she served. I want you to pause for a second and think about your community, the impact of security officers, and why their lives matter. I want you to use the same energy to like and share the story of Aréanah with people around you, to spread her story not just for sensational purposes, but to honor her life and the sacrifices she's made to her community. Subscribe, not to just add to the subscribers count, but to never miss stories like Aréanah's, because that's our advocacy. In the days that followed, grief rippled outward like waves. Her family, her fellow officers, and her community were left grappling with the suddenness of her loss. A city that had grown used the headlines of violence stopped to mourn one of its own, taken not in the line of duty on patrol, but in the quiet vulnerability of returning home. This is not just the story of a crime. It is the story of a life, of who Aréanah Preston was, what she stood for, and how her tragic end has left scars on an entire community. It is also a call to remember that behind every headline is a human being with dreams, loved ones, and a future that mattered. Aréanah Makayla Preston was more than just a name in the news. She was a vibrant young woman whose presence left an imprint on everyone she met. Born and raised in Chicago, she was deeply rooted in her community and fiercely proud of the city she called home. Friends describe her as warm, funny, and approachable, the kind of person who could brighten a room just by walking in. To her family, she wasn't just Aréanah. She was a daughter, a sister, and a twin whose bond with her sibling was unshakable. Her loved ones remember her not as a victim, but as a woman who had so much more to give. From a young age, Aréanah carried within her a sense of purpose. She was drawn to service, justice, and fairness. Her decision to pursue a career in law enforcement wasn't just about wearing a uniform. It was about making a difference. She wanted to be on the side of protecting, uplifting, and helping others. Those close to her said she was always the one who stood up for others, who stepped in when someone was being mistreated, who reminded people their worth when they had forgotten it themselves. Her academic journey was just as impressive as her professional one. She had earned her bachelor's degree and by the time of her death, was only days away from graduating with a master's in jurisprudence from Loyola University. The degree was more than a milestone. It was a stepping stone toward her dream of becoming a lawyer or even joining the FBI. She wanted to combine her love for justice with her deep sense of service, continuing to build a life dedicated to making things better. But Aréanah wasn't only defined by her work or her studies. She was full of life and joy. Friends say she loved to laugh, loved to dance, and never missed a chance to make memories with the people she cherished. She carried herself with a confidence that was magnetic, but also with humility that made people feel comfortable around her. She was in every way the embodiment of hope and potential. Her colleagues on the force saw her as more than just a coworker. They admired her energy, her commitment, and her bravery. Joining the Chicago Police Department is not an easy path, but Aréanah embraced it with determination. She was still early in her career, but her impact was already being felt. Through the compassion she showed to those she served and the loyalty she showed to those she worked alongside. To her family, Aréanah was the heart of their home. She was a loving daughter who never failed to check in, a sister who could be counted on for support, and a twin whose connection was described as almost unbreakable. Her mother spoke often of her pride in Aréanah's achievements, and her siblings admired the way she balanced ambition with kindness. For them, her accomplishments were only the beginning of what they knew would be a remarkable life. In many ways, Aréanah embodied the best of her generation, ambitious, hopeful, and unwilling to let her circumstances define her limits. She had dreams that stretched far beyond her neighborhood and ambitions that were already becoming reality. And yet, she stayed grounded in love, family, and service. Aréanah Makayla Preston was not just a young officer in uniform. She was a young woman with a future that mattered, with a story that deserved to be told, and with a life that deserved to be lived. Her journey was one of rising above challenges, breaking barriers, and inspiring those around her. And that makes her loss not just a tragedy for her family, but for all of us who believe in the power of hope, resilience, and dreams. The night of May 6, 2023, began like so many others for Aréanah Makayla Preston. She had just finished her shift with the Chicago Police Department, doing the work she loved, wearing the badge with pride. It was late, but for Aréanah, late nights were nothing new. She had grown accustomed to balancing her demanding schedule, juggling her responsibilities as an officer, while also preparing for her graduation. That evening, she headed home to Avalon Park, a neighborhood she knew well, her heart surely full of anticipation for the celebration that was only days away, walking the stage to receive her hard-earned master's degree. But as she pulled into her street, just blocks from her home, the night turned tragic. In the stillness of the early morning hours, her car became the setting for a crime that would devastate her family and send shockwaves through Chicago.
Confident, determined, funny, a ray of light. Those are just a few words Chicago police officer Aréanah Preston's mother used to describe her at the funeral today.
Officer Preston was shot and killed outside of her home after a shift in the 5th District. Loved ones and strangers alike honored her on this emotional day.
CBS 2's Sabrina Franza begins our team coverage.
If we are lucky, a rare breed will grace our lives with their presence. Behold, Aréanah.
Officer Aréanah Preston's favorite color was yellow, the color of sunshine.
There will never be enough to define just how much of a sunflower Aréanah Makayla Preston truly was to us.
The color worn by her fellow Chicago police officers in District 5. Her light dimmed, but not extinguished.
I plan to lead, love, and be just like you.
The 24-year-old Chicago police officer was shot and killed outside her Avalon Park home, days away from walking across the stage to receive her master's diploma.
I was determined to invest in her so that in return, she invested in the world. And Aréanah did just that.
The world now knows what it was to befriend Officer Preston, what it felt like to bask in the light she radiate.
She was this big, but she was really this big.
The woman who loved to be silly just as much as she loved serving others.
The last conversation we had, I posted your graduation pictures and you told me you loved me. I told you to tell the world. My exact words were, don't tell me, tell them. So here I am telling everyone that we love you, Nani.
It's in that knowledge the world also knows the loss, can share in a mother's tears, understands the shadow created in the absence of Aréanah's light.
Death is only a tragic thing if you have not lived. my baby lived.
Realizes the importance of carrying on her mission to protect Chicago.
Rest peacefully, my sweet baby. Mama has it from here.
Following that service, a funeral, but also a celebration of life. Preston's family said their final goodbyes in a private ceremony. We're in Washington Heights. Sabrina Franza, CBS 2 News.
For young men, all teenagers, had set their sights on her. Their mission that night was cruelly simple: rob and steal. When they spotted Aréanah arriving home, they saw not a human being, not a young woman who would dedicate her life to service, but a target. Aréanah, still in her uniform, represented everything she had worked for and everything she believed in. But to them, she was just another opportunity. They approached her with weapons drawn, demanding her belongings. What followed was a brief, violent encounter that ended with gunshots piercing the silence of the night. Aréanah was struck, and the men fled, leaving behind not just a wounded officer, but a young woman fighting for her life. The neighborhood was shaken awake by the sounds of gunfire. Residents rushed to their windows and porches, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. Calls poured into 911. Help arrived quickly, but for Aréanah, it was too late. Despite the efforts of first responders and medical teams, she could not be saved. In the span of just minutes, the promise of her bright future was extinguished. The timing of her death was particularly cruel. Just a week later, her family should have been celebrating her graduation, cheering as she walked across the stage in her cap and gown. Instead, they were left planning a funeral. Her gown, once a symbol of her perseverance, would never be worn. Her dreams of serving as a lawyer or joining the FBI would never be realized. The life she had built, piece by piece, had been stolen in an instant. The news of her killing spread quickly across Chicago and beyond. For many, it was unthinkable that a young woman who had dedicated her life to protecting others could be cut down in such a senseless act of violence. Her death was not only a tragedy for her family and friends, but also for the community she served and the city she loved. She was one of their own, and her loss left an ache that words could not capture. As investigators began piecing together the timeline of that night, the details painted a haunting picture. This was not a random act. It was a deliberate decision by a group of teenagers who, in that moment, chose violence and greed over humanity. For Aréanah, it was the cruelest twist of fate that her path intersected with theirs in those fatal minutes. Her final hours were filled with the very values she stood for: dedication, resilience, and a commitment to service. She had ended her shift with pride, returned home to rest, and looked forward to the next chapter of her life. But that next chapter would never come. Instead, her story was forced into tragedy, leaving behind a community in mourning and a family whose grief will never fade. In the days that followed Aréanah Preston's death, the city of Chicago demanded answers. How could a young police officer, returning home from a night shift, be ambushed so brutally just steps away from her house? Detectives wasted no time pulling together surveillance footage, tracking stolen vehicles, and interviewing witnesses. What emerged was a chilling discovery. Aréanah's murder was not a random act of violence, but the result of a planned robbery spree carried out by a group of teenagers. These young men, all between the ages of 16 and 19, had spent the night prowling neighborhoods, searching for victims. They had stolen cars, flash weapons, and terrorized strangers. By the time they crossed paths with Aréanah, they had already left behind a trail of fear. But what they didn't realize was that their latest victim was not just another target. She was a Chicago police officer, and the weight of that fact would bring the full force of law enforcement down upon them. Investigators moved quickly, piecing together the suspect's movements through surveillance cameras and digital footprints. Within days, police identified the 4 young men believed to be responsible. Their arrest shook the community once more, not only because of the brutality of the crime, but because of their ages. Teenagers, barely out of childhood, accused of killing a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting her city. Prosecutors soon laid out the charges: first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and weapons offenses. The courtroom became the next battleground, a place where Aréanah's family, friends, and colleagues would come face-to-face with the accused. Each appearance was a reminder of a devastating loss, and each charge was a testament to the seriousness of the crime. This was not just about one life lost. It was about accountability, about ensuring that those responsible were held to the highest standard of justice. The investigation also revealed the heartbreaking detail that Aréanah had been wearing her police uniform when she was attacked. It was a fact that struck a deep chord, both in the legal proceedings and in the public perception of the case. To many, it underscored the reckless disregard the suspects had for human life, and it magnified the tragedy of her death. She was not only targeted as a woman alone in her car, she was targeted despite the clear symbol of service and duty she wore proudly. As evidence mounted, it became clear that this was more than a story of a robbery gone wrong. It was a symptom of something larger, cycles of violence, desperation, and broken systems that left young men turning to crime instead of opportunity. Yet in the eyes of the law, the choices they made that night were deliberate. They carried weapons. They sought victims. And ultimately, they fired the shots that ended a young officer's life. The case gripped Chicago, with each development followed closely by the media and the public. For the city's police officers, it was personal. One of their own had been murdered in cold blood. For Aréanah's family, it was a test of endurance, sitting through hearings that replayed the worst night of their lives. And for the community, it was a harsh reminder of the violence that too often scarred their neighborhoods. Justice was still far from over. Trials take time, and legal proceedings move slowly. But one thing was certain. The murder of Aréanah Makayla Preston would not be brushed aside. The investigation had laid bare the truth, and the courts would decide the consequences. In the meantime, her name had already become a rallying cry for justice, for accountability, and for a city determined not to forget. When the news of Aréanah Preston's death spread, it wasn't just headlines and press releases. It was sobs, phone calls in the middle of the night, and the unbearable silence that followed in her family's home. Her mother, devastated beyond words, described her daughter as her everything, her pride, her joy, and her best friend. Aréanah wasn't just a police officer. She was a heartbeat of her family. Each story her loved ones shared painted a portrait of a young woman whose light touched everyone around her, making her loss feel even more profound. Her colleagues at the Chicago Police Department gathered in uniform, standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces etched with grief. They spoke of her kindness, her laughter during long shifts, and her determination to do her job with compassion. For them, Aréanah wasn't just another badge number. She was a friend, a sister in blue, and someone they could always count on when times were tough. Her death wasn't only a personal loss. It was a wound in the very fabric of their department. At vigils held in her honor, candles flickered against the dark sky, each flame symbolizing the love of a community that refused to let her name be forgotten. Neighbors, friends, and strangers gathered to share their heartbreak. They spoke of how tragic it was that a young woman who had dedicated her life to keeping others safe could be so violently taken from them. Their voices cracked as they asked the same haunting question. How could this happen? Her sorority sisters and college friends came forward too, remembering Aréanah not just as Officer Preston, but as the vibrant young woman who loved to dance, study hard, and dream of a future filled with possibilities. They shared stories of her laughter echoing in dorm halls, and her encouraging words during tough times. To them, she was a role model, proof that hard work and perseverance could turn dreams into reality. Losing her meant losing a living reminder of what was possible. Even those who had never met Aréanah felt her absence. Chicagoans flooded social media with tributes, photographs, and memories, using hashtags to ensure her story reached as many people as possible. Some wrote about how they never knew her personally, but were touched by her commitment to her community. Others expressed outrage that someone who symbolized hope and service had been struck down so senselessly. Together, their voices built a collective cry for justice and remembrance. Her family's grief, however, carried the heaviest weight. Aréanah was preparing to graduate with her master's degree, planning a celebration her loved ones were eagerly waiting for. Now, instead of graduation gowns, they faced funeral attire. Instead of speeches of congratulations, they delivered eulogies. It was a cruel twist of fate that robbed them not only of her present, but also the future they had imagined with her. Yet, in the midst of their pain, her family found strength in sharing her story. They wanted the world to know who she was beyond the headlines, a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a fighter who lived with courage and compassion. Every memory, every photograph, and every word they spoke became a way to ensure that Aréanah's legacy would live on, not just as another victim of violence, but as a woman of purpose and promise. The voices of family, friends, and community became intertwined, carrying her memory forward. They mourned together, they prayed together, and they demanded justice together. In their collective grief, they also found resilience, the determination to honor her life, even as they grappled with the unbearable weight of her absence. And through their voices, one thing became clear. Aréanah Makayla Preston would never be forgotten. Aréanah Preston's death did more than devastate her loved ones. It forced an entire city to confront the realities of violence, community safety, and the weight carried by those who choose to serve. Her story wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger, painful pattern that too many families in Chicago and across the country know all too well. She became a face and a name in a broader conversation about what it means to live and die in the shadows of senseless violence. Her passing highlighted the fragility of life in communities where violence strikes without warning. Here was a young woman who had chosen to dedicate her life to protecting others, yet she became a victim herself. That cruel paradox sparked conversations about how safety is not guaranteed by a uniform, a badge, or even by education and ambition. The tragedy underscored how deeply systemic issues affect not only everyday citizens, but also those sworn to protect them. Her story also brought forward questions about the pressures and risks faced by women in law enforcement. Aréanah was not just a police officer. She was a Black woman in a field where she had to constantly prove her strength, her capability, and her resilience. For many, her death became a reminder of the intersection of gender, race, and service, and how these layers of identity shaped her journey while magnifying the sorrow of her loss. The community's reflection on her passing stretched beyond her role as an officer. People were forced to reckon with how violence has seeped into the everyday rhythm of life, robbing families of daughters, sons, sisters, and brothers. Each candle lit at her vigil was not just for her, but for countless others whose names have been whispered in grief. Aréanah's story became a vessel for all those voices demanding to be heard, demanding that their pain no longer be ignored. Her death also raised conversations about what justice really means. While arrests and trials may come, justice for her family and community can never be complete because no court ruling can return her smile, her laughter, or her future. This recognition has led many to call for deeper change. Change that goes beyond punishment and addresses the root causes of violence that make tragedies like this possible. At universities, within her sorority, and in community groups, her story became a teaching moment. Professors, activists, and leaders use her life as an example of dedication and achievement, while also using her death as a sobering reminder of the work that still must be done. It was a call to young people to rise, to care for their communities, and to fight for change so that others might not share her fate. The reflection on Aréanah's life also served as a challenge to the public. It asked people not to become numb to violence, not to scroll past her name, and not to treat her as just another statistic. Her story demanded humanity. It asked listeners, readers, and viewers to sit with the pain, to feel it, and to let that pain drive them toward action, whether through advocacy, community work, or simply caring for one another more deeply. Ultimately, Aréanah's tragedy became more than just a story of loss. It became a mirror. It forced everyone to look at what kind of society we live in and what kind of society we want to build. Her life was full of promise, and her death was a devastating reminder of how fragile that promise can be. But in reflection, she continues to inspire conversations about change, resilience, and the hope that her story will one day spark a safer, kinder, and more just world. Aréanah Preston's story is not one that should be left to fade quietly into the archives of tragedy. Her life deserves to be remembered, her dreams deserve to be honored, and her legacy deserves to inspire action. As her community continues to heal, there's a call that echoes louder than grief, a call for people to step up, to support one another, and to work toward preventing future losses like hers. This is not just about mourning Aréanah. It's about choosing to build something better in her name. One way her community has answered this call is through vigils, fundraisers, and memorials. These are not only gestures of love, but also rallying points for change. Every candle lit, and every tear shed serves as a reminder that her life mattered. But beyond symbolic actions, there's a pressing need for practical solutions. More community resources, youth mentorship, and systemic reforms that make neighborhoods safer for everyone. Her sorority sisters and friends have already taken steps to amplify her voice by sharing her story widely and advocating for justice. They've reminded the public that she was not just an officer in uniform. She was family, sister, she was a daughter, and she was one of us. Their call to action is not simply to remember her, but to live out the values she embodied: service and resilience. Law enforcement agencies have also found themselves challenged by her death. It has become a stark reminder that the people behind the badge are not invincible. They are human, vulnerable, and deserving of protection and respect as much as anyone else. Some within the department have called for better support systems for officers, while also committing to building stronger bridges with the very communities they serve. In Aréanah's memory, that bridge building feels more urgent than ever. For the wider public, the call to action may look different. It could be as simple as looking out for your neighbor, speaking up when something feels wrong, or joining local efforts aimed at addressing violence. Small acts of kindness and courage, when multiplied across communities, can create real shifts. Each of us holds the power to honor her legacy by making choices that bring us closer to the safer, more compassionate world she envisioned. Her story also pushes us to think about long-term change. It challenges policymakers, educators, and leaders to prioritize communities often left behind and to invest in programs that uplift instead of neglect. True justice for Aréanah cannot be measured solely in arrests. It must be seen in the prevention of future tragedies, in the creation of opportunities, and in the building of trust across neighborhoods. This call to action is also deeply personal. It asks us not just to listen, but to respond, not just to sympathize, but to move. Whether it's sharing her story, volunteering time, supporting advocacy groups, or even just having hard conversations about violence, every step counts. Each act of engagement honors her memory and strengthens the hope that her death will not be in vain. Aréanah's community has already shown the world what unity in grief looks like. Now, the challenge is to transform that grief into purpose. By standing together, by demanding change, and by refusing to let her memory be forgotten, we ensure that her legacy endures. She gave her life in service, and now it is our responsibility to continue that service, not just for her, but for every life cut short too soon. When we look back at the life of Aréanah Makayla Preston, we see more than just a heartbreaking story of a young woman taken too soon. We see a vibrant soul who worked tirelessly for her future, who loved deeply, and who cared about leaving a mark on the world. Her passing is not just a statistic. It's a reminder that behind every headline is a human being with dreams, laughter, and loved ones left behind. Aréanah's life was a light, and though that light was dimmed far too early, its glow still lingers in the hearts of those who knew her. Her story forces us to confront the fragility of life and the ripple effect that violence leaves behind. Friends who once leaned on her for advice now face an empty chair. Family members who celebrated her victories must now grapple with an unimaginable void. Her colleagues in law enforcement mourn the loss of a promising officer, someone who wore the badge with honor and with hope for bridging divides. Each of these voices reminds us that her absence is more than symbolic. It's real, it's painful, and it's permanent. And yet, within the grief lies a thread of resilience. Aréanah's memory continues to inspire others to step into roles of service, compassion, and advocacy. She dreamed of change, and in her passing, she has sparked conversations that might lead to the very transformation she longed to see. In this way, her legacy is alive. It speaks through every vigil, every speech, and every act of kindness done in her honor. As we reflect, it becomes clear that remembering her is not enough. The true measure of honoring Aréanah lies in action. It lies in the choices we make each day to uplift one another, to speak against violence, and to demand justice where it is due. Her story is not just one for mourning. It's one for mobilizing, for pushing forward with courage. But beyond the calls to action, there is also space for quiet remembrance, for the gentle memories of her laughter, her smile, her determination, for the small moments that define her life more than any tragedy ever could. In remembering these pieces of her humanity, we keep her whole, not just as a victim, but as a vibrant woman who lived fully even if briefly. This closing reflection also carries a message for each of us personally. It reminds us to hold close the ones we love, to pursue our own dreams with urgency, and to never take tomorrow for granted. Aréanah's story is tragic, yes, but it also calls us to gratitude for the time we have and for the people who walk alongside us on life's journey. To everyone listening, this is where you can help carry Aréanah's story forward. Share her story so her name is never forgotten. Leave your thoughts in the comments to show her family that her memory lives on in the hearts of many. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel so you can continue to hear stories like Aréanah's. Stories that matter, that teach, and that deserve to be remembered. Aréanah Makayla Preston's life may have been cut short, but her impact is not defined by the way she died. It is defined by the way she lived. May her legacy inspire us all to act with courage, love with depth, and believe in the possibility of a safer, kinder world. Her story does not end here. It continues with us.